How was survival horror born? There are surprisingly few articles and interviews that shed light on this very obscure topic. We know how video games were born, and there are a lot of documentaries on the subject, but there's almost nothing on the origins of horror video games. The little information we do have is diverging, like most sites list Monster Maze as the first survival horror game, but that's not actually true. I really had to dig deep for this one. My goal is to show you the games that made the genre, and a little of the behind the scenes of how they came to be. From a huge fan of the genre, this is how survival horror started. The first documented horror game was brought forth alongside, believe it or not, the first commercial home video game console, the Magnavox Odyssey, in 1972. The game was called Haunted House. The 70s marked a revolution for video games. Before, games on PC were primarily focused on strategy or puzzle solving because of the lack of appropriate displays and resources to accommodate fast-paced action games. The arcades were changing too, from electromechanical games to video games. In 1972, Ralph Baer's idea of an entertainment device that could be plugged to the TV was finally realized. You gotta understand, up until this point, television was a passive-only medium, but the Magnavox Odyssey would change that forever. A total of 28 games were distributed for the console. In the United States, it came with 12 games out of the box, and between them, Haunted House. Haunted House is composed of a series of cards and an overlay that is taped over the TV screen, held by static. Most games worked like this, as the console was limited to monochrome and displaying 3 dots and a line. In the game, one player takes the role of the detective and the other the role of the ghost. The detective closes their eyes and the ghost uses both controllers to choose the location of the treasure. The detective has to gather clues and messages, eventually reaching the treasure, at which point both players compare the number of clue cards they have. It's so interesting how the limitations of the time drove them to use overlays as a way of complementing the experience. Kinda like a halfway point between tabletop games and fully digital ones. Much like those games, the Odyssey didn't keep track of points or even generated audio, leaving that part to the players. Even though it can't be considered an actual survival horror game, Haunted House is considered to be the first game to incorporate horror elements, a huge step towards survival horror. It was the precursor to the horror games we see today, even if there was no intent to actually scare you. The Odyssey would unfortunately fail, selling 350,000 units worldwide, but their ashes would pave the way for console gaming, and the more successful Atari 2600 launched in 1977. After 72, notable games made their debut and left a huge mark in gaming culture, such as Asteroids, Pac-Man, and Space Invaders. We could even count 1978 Space Invaders as a precursor of the subgenre, as the game entails an alien invasion, with the landscape getting progressively destroyed and the music speeding up, creating a sense of anxiety and panic. But it was in the next year, 1979, that a movie, of all things, would change the horror games landscape forever. That movie was Ridley Scott's Alien. There isn't much time since I first watched the film, and I gotta say, it still holds up today. The movie builds tension in a brilliant manner, and it's scary. The practical effects incorporated and the careful use of the xenomorph's image, as not to demystify the creature, helped the movie to age really well despite its time. The creature, unknown to us and to the characters, generated fear and tension because not only did it look threatening, but it was a skilled hunter with potential and weaknesses unknown, and they had to figure out how to deal with it. It was a huge cultural phenomenon and inspired the creation of the first ever survival horror game on PC. Personal computers were getting more consumer-friendly and appealing. Video gaming consoles like the Odyssey and the Atari 2600 played a fundamental role in pushing the evolution of gaming PCs. And with that, playing games on PC became more viable. In December of '81, the same year that Nintendo's Donkey Kong made its first appearance, pushing barrels into a familiar plumber who would later be known as Mario, AX2 Uchuu Yusousen Nostromo was launched on PC. By PC, I mean the Commodore PET 2001 and the PC 6001. Nostromo is unofficially based on the Alien IP, the first survival horror game, even if the term didn't even exist at the time. A lot of people consider Monster Maze to be the first one, but Nostromo actually came before. Unfortunately, few things can be found about its development. We know it was launched by ASCII Corporation. I couldn't find any interviews and barely any articles. I couldn't even download and play the game. This one is really obscure. If any of you guys speak Japanese, there are probably a few more articles online to be found, or old magazines. If any new information is found, I'll pin it in the comments down below. Some sites credit, and I apologize in advance for my pronunciation, Akira Takiguchi and Masakuni Mitsuhashi as creators of the game, but the source code only credits Hiromi Oba. Looking for footage for the video, I came across an article with a little more information that I haven't seen anywhere else. Apparently, Hiromi Oba is Mr. Mitsuhashi's pen name, which would explain his absence from the source code. Nostromo might not look like much nowadays, but even if rudimentary, the core of the genre is still there. You've got a monster, the alien, represented by that little circle with a tail, chasing you down whilst you go from room to room, gathering different symbols. Gathering these objects awards you points. You've got a limited inventory, so you can only have 5 of them at once, needing to reach the exit to deposit them. The xenomorph sees, follows, and preys on your whereabouts, and you've got limited time to finish each level. It's still arcade at its core, kinda like a horror version of Pac-Man, but the game has a lot of what would be considered staples of the genre nowadays, like limited resources, in Nostromo's case, time and inventory space. A strong foe that you don't seem to be able to defeat by conventional means, driving you to run through claustrophobic corridors and hide as your primary tactic. Even if infinitely more complex, the 2014 Alien Isolation game uses some of the same basis, as your goal is to progress to the level whilst avoiding the xenomorph on your tail, no pun intended. Nostromo was a very important game in the conception of survival horror, and Alien Isolation managed to leave its own mark on the genre, considered by many, and myself included, one of the best survival horror games around. And that due in no small amount to the brilliant AI of the xenomorph. I don't know how they managed to, but the alien is so smart. You think you managed to trick him, only to be surprised by him tracking you down, limiting his search to an area you're likely to be in, given the movement he perceived from you. As much as you learn from its movements and patterns, it learns from you. It's not completely predictable, a fault of a lot of horror game enemies. The way to deal with it may even cause a lot of frustration at the beginning because it doesn't work like any horror game antagonist. You need to really try and experiment to see what you actually can get away with. I watched the movie for the first time before playing the game, and it's incredible the attention to detail they put in it. We begin on a ship very similar to the Nostromo from the first movie, a commercial towing vehicle, and it's almost, if not a one-to-one to the movie. That attention to detail is spread throughout the whole game, with impressive reconstructed areas from the movie. A lot of nods to it are also subtly sprinkled throughout the whole experience, like the cat we can hear at the beginning of the game. As I said, I had just watched the movie before playing the game, and I couldn't help but feel excited to be able to interact directly with such an impressive reconstruction of that world. I can't wait for its confirmed sequel whenever it launches. The direct link between horror movies and horror video games is one that makes a lot of sense. Horror movies are great, but I feel like games can be an evolution of their concept, a medium that better accommodates their objectives. If the main objective is to tell a story and instigate fear, interactiveness, crucial moment-to-moment decision-making, and the immersion resulted from it are the next logical steps. There's also a huge disconnection between the audience and the main characters in a lot of horror movies because of the characters' decisions that, at times, are kinda dumb. A narrative device to drive the horror plot further and increase danger. Not all horror movies do that, but it's a recurrent enough trope, especially in teenage horror films, that it's worth mentioning. In a horror game, you don't have to feel empathy for a character, you are the character. Or at least you are the one in charge of their decisions, stupid or otherwise, and have to push further by your own accord. We have much to thank the Alien franchise. Not only did it contribute greatly to cinema and pop culture in general, but it indirectly pioneered and evolved the survival horror genre as a whole. In the same month Nostromo was launched, 3D Monster Maze made its debut. Made by programmer Malcolm Evans from J.K. Gray's idea, Monster Maze is the first survival horror game in the first-person perspective and one of the first 3D games for PC, launched for the ZX81. The game wasn't made by a huge corporation or even conceptualized to be a game from the get-go. Evans had experience as a microprocessor scientist and received the ZX81 from his wife on his birthday. When testing to see what the computer was capable of, Evans developed basic aspects of what would become the game. J.K. Gray suggested turning it into a game and adding a dinosaur, and Evans' friends convinced him of the quality and commercial potential of the game. 3D Monster Maze was released by J.K. Gray Software, later re-released in '82 by New Generation Software, Evans' own startup. The plot, just a pretext for the gameplay. You are at a carnival and are introduced to a new attraction. Then, what the game calls mists of time passes through you and you wake up in a maze. The gameplay, simple. You can move forwards and rotate the camera 90 degrees. You are in a maze, a dinosaur chases you. There's only one exit. Go. Points are awarded from the steps you take when the monster is on your trail and when you reach the exit. It's easy to look at the game now and think there's not much to it, that it's not even that scary, but you've got to understand, at the time, games weren't like this. Games didn't try to scare you, and Monster Maze, when you're really into it, can get really tense. When the dinosaur is close to you, messages will be displayed on screen like he's hunting for you or run, he's behind you, which can really get you worked up. Or when you see him right in front of you and have to quickly turn, which is impossible because turning is really slow, and try to get away from him. A quote by Malcolm Evans on the text warnings displayed at the start of the game, intended to prevent people with nervous disposition from harm, reads, "I didn't realize how realistic it was going to be. I was testing the game before adding text when suddenly I jumped out of my skin, and I thought, if someone had a heart attack, would I be responsible for it?" A Monster Maze was treading new grounds, and that, on its own, can be a very scary thing. The game kinda reminds me of Slender, the 8 pages, although saying that Slender reminds me of Monster Maze would be more fair. Both games have the player dropped in an unknown environment and having to execute tasks to escape, with the constant threat of an unknown creature, building tension with every step. In Monster Maze's case, the task would be to traverse the maze and find a way out, and in Slender's case, it would be to find the 8 pages. 3D Monster Maze would become a hit right after launch. Malcolm Evans would fully focus on computer gaming after the branch he worked on as a microprocess scientist closed. New Generation Software, his company, received recognition brought by Monster Maze, then released more games and further advanced 3D graphics, becoming synonymous with 3D gaming on the ZX platform. The 80s were times of heights and lows. The golden age of arcades was passing, and in '83 there was a huge crash in the North American video game market that almost killed console gaming. Video game revenue dropped 97% from '83 to '85. This crash allowed for personal computers to gain a bigger foothold. PC gaming was thriving, especially in lower cost machines such as the Commodore and ZX platforms. By 85, the console market was dormant for 2 years in America, but in Japan, Nintendo was thriving. So much so, in fact, that the company decided to launch their console in the US. It took some time, but against the pessimistic odds, the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES, was a huge success. Being the first platform to allow third-party developers to produce and distribute games for the console, the NES managed to revitalize the American video game market. The 90s would follow as a time of innovation in the video game market and a huge shakeup for horror games. Launched in 1992 for the Microsoft Disk Operating System, or MS-DOS, Alone in the Dark was the very first 3D horror game with 3D polygon characters, making clever use of pre-rendered backgrounds and employing fixed camera angles. It's responsible for popularizing some of the genre's tropes, like focus on survival over combat, limited player inventory, scarcity of resources, puzzle-riddled gameplay, and the aforementioned fixed camera angle. As iconic and important to the genre as it is, Alone in the Dark almost didn't happen. French company Infogrames had just acquired the rights for Call of Cthulhu, a role-playing game based on H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos, and were looking to make a horror game with its concept. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos birthed the genre of cosmic horror, exploring the fear of the unknown, personified, if you can call it that, by the creatures that exist beyond our own comprehension. A programmer at Infogrames, Frederick Reynolds, I'm pretty sure I'm botching the pronunciation, who was a fan of horror film directors such as Dario Argento and Giorgio Romero, was engrossed with the idea of developing a horror game. Reynolds asked to lead the development of the game, but because of the ambitious nature of his pitch, which involved the game being rendered using 3D animation, something that Infogrames CEO Bruno Bonnell thought impossible given the limitations of the time, he was instead allocated to work on a French port for SimCity. Reynolds had a passion and a vision, he just had to prove it was possible. So alongside fellow employee Didier Chanfray, Reynolds spent his evenings working on a 3D animation engine to prove his concept. Chanfray was responsible for creating a lot of the visual identity that the franchise would evolve into, including a shot of a man on a dark corridor with only a lantern to light his way, an image that eventually mutated into the cover art of the game. Later on, fellow graphic artist Yael Boraz joined the team after participating on a contest among staff to design potential backgrounds for the game. In September of 1991, they finally presented their project to Bonnell. It contained only a few rooms, but it was enough to convince Infogrames to greenlight the project and allocate more people to its development. The team went from 3 to 6 developers, and the project was a go. In the game, we follow Edward Canby, the protagonist of the subsequent games of the franchise, a private detective hired by an antique dealer to investigate a piano in the Deserto mansion, abandoned after its owner, Jeremy Hartwood, committed suicide. Or you play as Emily Hartwood, Jeremy's niece, also in search of the piano, for she believes it contains a suicide note by Jeremy. The brilliant background design realized by Yael Boraz emulated paintings, contributing to the eerie atmosphere. It kind of reminds me of Van Gogh paintings, giving it an almost dreamlike atmosphere. To me, one of the more striking images comes in the first few minutes of the game. As you guide Edward inside the mansion, you can see the hands of a creature observing their prey. This moment specifically separates the character from the player. Edward is oblivious to what lies ahead, and you, the player, willingly choose to guide him inside either way. This moment, an unspoken agreement that you know what you're getting yourself into, even if Edward has no idea. Its brilliance comes from all the different possible feelings this moment can give you. Every single one enhances the experience. Fear from the creature and the subsequent will to persist despite of it. Awareness of what lies ahead, curiosity and anxiety. guilt for getting the character into a situation they are unaware of, and the duty to see it through because of it. I didn't play Alone in the Dark at the time, but even now, I can't help but to be drawn by its charm. There's a strong personality in the character's design, a goofiness to the movement, and a surreality to the enemies. Horror games today try to be a little more grounded as a means to immerse the player more into the experience. I wonder how a horror game as surreal as this one would look like today. Alone in the Dark was the first 3D survival horror game with 3D polygon characters. It was groundbreaking. I know realism isn't the first thing that comes to mind when you look at the game, but this was amazing for the time. Reynolds left Infogrames during the production of Alone in the Dark 2, which he felt strayed too far from his original vision, allegedly. I don't remember exactly where I got this information from, and I couldn't find it again, so take it with a grain of salt. The game would spawn multiple sequels and spin-offs that would unfortunately fail to reach the heights of the first game. Last year, Alone in the Dark, a reimagining of the original, was released, the first game in the franchise in the last 10 years. Reynolds had a pivotal role in the conception of Alone in the Dark, and the game was very important to his life also, as it was during its development that he and Yael Barros found each other and had a child together. 92's Alone in the Dark received huge critical acclaim, changed the genre forever, and would go on to inspire the birth of Resident Evil. In 1996, Resident Evil, or Biohazard, was launched. By then, consoles like the PS1 and the Sega Saturn had already launched, and the Nintendo 64 would soon follow, furthering the popularization of 3D video game graphics. Resident Evil is responsible for getting the genre to mainstream appeal. It coined the term survival horror. It was so influential that the first look we have as zombies in the game, the iconic head turn, is still referenced to in multiple medias to this day. The game was conceived initially as a remake of Sweet Home, a role-playing game launched after a movie with the same name in 1989. It follows 5 main characters that explore a haunted mansion. Sweet Home didn't sell very well, but inside Capcom they knew the game was good, it just didn't reach expectations. Shinji Mikami was then tasked to make a game that used some of the same features from the original game, and he quickly made the game a whole other thing. Resident Evil looked quite different at first. To begin with, it was a Super NES game, later changing into a first-person PlayStation game. It even featured ghosts instead of zombies. A few changes were made amidst development, with the goal of making the game more accessible. Influenced by movies like Dawn of the Dead, the change to zombies was made. Mikami had the idea of making the game first person at first, but the limitations of the time didn't allow for the scenery he had in mind, so inspired by Alone in the Dark, they opted for fixed camera angles and a pre-rendered background. The controls, similar to Alone in the Dark, were clunky, like controlling a tank, but it arguably makes the game scarier. It always feels dangerous and difficult, like you could die at any moment. Saves are integrated into the gameplay. You can only save the game by using the iconic typewriters positioned throughout the mansion, and to use it, you need to have ink. So not only are no automatic save points, but you also have saving the game as a limited and scarce resource. Dying is an imminent threat at all times, and now it has stakes. If you save the game at this moment, you might not have any ink left to save later. But if you don't save now and die before you get a chance to, you'll lose progress. Resident Evil 1 is a game that gets so many things right. The whole old mansion with hidden passages and secrets to uncover thing is always interesting. Even inventory management is carefully crafted to make sure that the player is kept on their toes. You have to treat your inventory like a puzzle, guiding the way you play, because if you make a wrong choice here or use too many resources there, you might need to resort to running as your only choice in the next encounter. I played some Resident Evil 4 when I was a kid, but it barely counts. When the remake of the first game, which is pretty much a 1-to-1, was given to PS Plus, I took the opportunity to really get started in the franchise, and I was blown away by how much I enjoyed that game. I mean, yeah, the intro cutscene is goofy, and the gameplay is dated, but it does have a lot of charm, and the world building is incredible. The first zombie reveal, how you slowly get deeper and deeper into this rabbit hole of a mansion, finding secret labs and experiments, and revealing the evil machinations of a huge pharmaceutical company. One of the things that stood out to me was a note, of all things, that you can find in the game. It was a journal kept by one of the researchers who worked at the mansion and eventually got infected himself. He describes his day-to-day, and we can see the infection taking hold, both physically, as he describes itchy skin, blisters and flesh falling out of his body, and psychologically, as his psyche deteriorates over time and the descriptions become more raw and animalistic, culminating in him killing the guard he didn't like, disregarding the act of killing like it was nothing. A scientific mind that evolves rapidly, his psyche almost entirely gone. Only animalistic urges and feelings remain. As he eats the guard, he speaks the last two words left in his vocabulary. Ichi. Yummy. Resident Evil is a franchise not afraid of change. The next two installments kept the same energy, but the focus was changed a bit, with Resident Evil 4. Focusing more on stylized action, movie-like gameplay and story, as Leon Kennedy has to save the president's daughter, kept on an infected village, but it still maintained some of the franchise's charm. Resident Evil 4's first attempt even resulted in the birth of a completely different franchise. Resident Evil 5 and 6 doubled down on the action gameplay, and the multiple spin-off games had negative receptions. It was kind of an identity crisis for the franchise. Even though a few games are still beloved by fans to this day, they had lost that which made the original so special. Then, Resident Evil Biohazard launched, the name adapting both the Japanese and foreign identities into one. It returned to survival horror, and this time, in the first person, just like Shinji Mikami wanted back then, but couldn't. The game was a return to form and a rebirth of sorts for the franchise, retreading some of the same grounds Resident Evil 1 did, and with current horror movie inspirations like the found footage trope of movies like Paranormal Activity. Even though the enemies weren't zombies this time around, it really felt like a reimagining of Resident Evil 1. The Baker residence had a lot of similarities with the mansion of the original. It even had a similar puzzle for the shotgun in the central statue. After the original Resident Evil success, Shinji Mikami was promoted to producer, oversaw the development of Resident Evil 2 and 3, and directed another survival horror classic, Dino Crisis. He has been a very influential person in the video game industry, attached with many projects over the years, including recent games like The Evil Within, Ghostwire Tokyo, and Hi-Fi Rush as founder of Tango Gameworks. Right now, Shinji Mikami manages Kamui Inc., his newfound studio, in which he aims to create an environment that would allow young game creators to have a more frequent opportunities to gain experience with games that have smaller development cycles. Biohazard expanded into a multimedia franchise. It helped to popularize a genre of games that, until that moment, was just a niche. A demand would follow, and soon be met by an allegory of amazing franchises. The survival horror subgenre is one of my favorites, and it definitely isn't covered enough. A lot of information is hidden beneath layers and layers of research, but I definitely had fun learning about its origins. Most of all, I just think it's interesting to bring these subjects out of obscurity. The developers featured in this video, and many behind the scenes that we don't get to know, are the unsung heroes of the genre. Much of the games we have today probably wouldn't even exist if it weren't for them, because of their passion, because they dare to push beyond the boundaries. If Nostromo didn't get made, or if Malcolm Evans didn't try to push the limits of the ZX81, Monster Maze would never have been released, and survival horror would look completely different today. If Reynolds, when told no, just listened and didn't follow his passion, Alone in the Dark wouldn't have pushed limits, it wouldn't have inspired Resident Evil, and it wouldn't have revolutionized the genre with fixed camera angles. If Shinji Mikami didn't try to make the Sweet Home remake his own, we never would have gotten one of the biggest horror game franchises. I think their experiences can be lessons for our own life, to tread new grounds even when it seems scary, to follow our passions even if they seem to be going nowhere at first, to believe in ourselves even and especially when others don't. I think that's the core of the genre, in fact. At the surface, these are all just games designed to scare you, but if you stop playing, they fail. So their objective can't be just to scare you deep down, right? It's about what it brings out of you, how being legitimately scared again and again can make you braver, how persisting despite your fear can build resolve, make you stronger. On a fundamental level, horror games aren't just trying to scare you, they are trying to make you better. Thank you for watching this far. There are a lot of games that I didn't get to cover, like Clock Tower and Silent Hill, so comment down below if you would like to see those videos, and subscribe not to miss out. I also would like to thank the channels whose footage I used in the video. Couldn't have done the video without them. Please go check their content if you're interested. Bye.